Turn to our third analyst, Ali Wong. Ali Wong is a PhD student in communications at Columbia University in New York City. And she's one of the recent student organizers during the Justice for Palestine protest movement. Her research areas explore how dis and misinformation, conspiracy theories, and radicalization inform both domestic extremism and foreign policy. Her education includes a BA and 2 master's degrees from New York University, as well as from the Middlebury Institute of International Studies and the Moscow State Institute of International Relations. As an organizer with Quad, that's Columbia University Apartheid Divest, she was recently a part of the campus movement that swept the nation, as her campus of Columbia University similarly led the nation over 50 years prior, calling for divestment during the American War on Vietnam. Now with us to share her story and her valuable perspective, please welcome Ali Wong.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Josh. I'm a little overwhelmed. That was so powerful. Jesse, thank you for sharing. Jody, thank you for sharing. And I'm just really honored to be able to be on this panel and to get to share this story, and also really honored to get to speak to a group of people who have given their lives for our country, for our freedoms, for our ability to critique our government. And so thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the new McCarthyism in the context of the front lines of protest at Columbia. And so Josh kind of went into a little bit of my background, and I wanted to just kind of highlight it to circle back around the conversation of the new McCarthyism in terms of how people have responded to me speaking publicly about this. So just to recap, I'm currently a PhD student focused on religious extremism in the US and Russia, looking at the things that Josh mentions, disinformation, conspiracy theories, and radicalization. I'm also currently a consultant on the Middle East North African regional security at the UN, and have a background in studying from an academic and experiential perspective things such as human rights, peace, nonviolence, international affairs, and global conflict. I also have a master's degree in counterterrorism and nuclear policy. So I didn't really get involved with the student movement in an official capacity until after the first round of arrests, which took place on April 18th. Up until this point, there had been obviously protests on campus that had kind of cropped up on campus, around campus, but didn't get a ton of traction in terms of media coverage. On the morning of April 17th, there was a post that went out that compared 1968 with what was then erected that morning, an encampment on the front lawn of Columbia University. And this was organized by a group called the Columbia University Apartheid Divestment, or Quad. And Quad is a coalition of over 100 different student groups that are all rallied around this same shared vision for seeing Columbia divest from Israel and other corrupt governments, to use our tuition dollars correctly in a way that is not going after the people and the community groups that we care about. So this encampment came up, and there were basically 3 main demands from Quad. Divestment. So Columbia University is $13.8 billion endowment, of which only 0.5% is actually shared, how that money is spent, how it's invested. And so knowing that Columbia University is invested in a tremendous amount of companies that are involved in the war, things such as weaponry, equipment, and so forth. And so asking for divestment from Israel. Secondly, financial transparency. Like I said, there's so much money at Columbia, but there's little transparency as to how this is spent, where it's going, where our tuition dollars are. Finally, amnesty. Amnesty for the students who have been targeted, those who have been arrested. Even prior to April, there had been chemical weapons used against pro-Palestinian protesters. Certain leaders of Quad had been targeted, surveilled, and so wanting for both legal amnesty as well as amnesty in Columbia itself for those who have been evicted from their dorms, those who are facing suspension and expulsion. So I got involved with the protests on campus when I watched on April 18th the police come onto campus and arrest, I believe, 108 students. At this point, the encampment had only been erected for about 24 hours, and myself and a few friends watched it all unfold from the journalism school, which is where I attend, which had an aerial shot of the encampment. And it was actually, it was horrifying, but it was also really beautiful to see this encampment where people are, breaking bread with each other, singing songs, sharing stories about their families and their cultures. To see the police militarized against peaceful protesters was horrifying. But as they were being led away, we watched, you can see kind of on the lower right-hand screen, an open green. We saw basically everyone who was in the encampment just walk over and set up shop, in the next lawn over. And so just kind of sharing this message that despite the police, despite the university administration, we would not be deterred from speaking out against a genocide that our tuition dollars are organizers of Quad. And at this point, some friends of mine and I started doing fundraising and contributing to the cause in sort of an unofficial capacity. I joined the student union that was offering a barrier of protection to the encampment by marching around the encampment, by using our voices and our physical bodies to be a barrier and to add numbers to this population to say what the university is doing and their lack of cooperation, their lack of negotiation over months is not okay. So through the course of getting involved with Quad and with the student union, I learned about kind of an organizational structure according to risk. So red, green, and yellow. So yellow being those who want to take the least amount of risk. They'll picket, they'll advocate, but they're not going to risk arrest or any of their standing with the university. Green, or sorry, that was green. Yellow, a little bit more, and then red finally being those who are, ride or die, arrest us, beat us, do whatever you need to, because that's what protest is about. It's about being demonstrative of what you're willing to give up for the sake of peace, for the sake of the community that you're advocating for. And so I joined that latter group of those who are willing to take a higher risk. And I did that for several reasons. One, just being an American citizen puts me at a level of privilege that my friends and colleagues, many of my friends and colleagues who are not American citizens, just don't have. I was not risking deportation. I was not risking, a visa issue, the color of my skin. I have lighter skin than many of my friends and colleagues, and fortunately and unfortunately, that comes with different stereotypes that I won't be targeted for. I'm a PhD student, meaning that the university is invested in me in a way that it's not invested in other students. So knowing that I would have privileged standing. And then finally, my name is Ali Wong. There's a famous comedian that also shares my name. And so knowing that I would be a difficult person for trolls to find online. I don't have social media, and I share my name with someone famous. And so fortunately, unfortunately, it's very difficult to find me online. So I knew that the risks that I was taking were still risks, but nothing compared to those of my friends and colleagues who were, at much higher risk of danger and long-term danger. So I got involved. So I explained how I got involved. So the day that the arrest took place on April 30th, it was basically kind of like I got a text message from this group of higher risk folks, and they said, it's go time. We have intel that says, a police raid is imminent, and we need people to guard this building that had been occupied the night before, because really thinking about property and space as being our only negotiating chip in our arsenal was really valuable. So I joined a group of students who were willing to kind of form a human barrier in front of this building that had been occupied. So I just want to show a very, very brief video. This is from a Columbia Journalism School student who was actually in the class that I was TAing, and she caught us as kind of forming this human chain in front of the building. So you can see me right there. So yeah, I mean, it's not a long video, but wanted to just give a sense of kind of the peace that existed in that moment. So when I got there, at that point, the campus grounds had been pretty much cleared and people barred from being on campus. And so it was a really strange feeling because, when you're on campus, there are just hundreds, if not thousands of people just buzzing everywhere. And so to be on campus in just this quiet serenity was a very odd feeling. And so when I got to the front of the building, we kind of formed this human chain, and all we did was we just sang. We sang really lovely songs about peace, about unity, about your people are my people, our struggles are aligned. And that was the site that the police walked into, was just us, a group of largely women, small women, arms linked, singing songs about peace. And at that point, once the police got onto campus, the people that are standing in front of us in that video are three groups of people. It's a group of journalists, so press who had been given passes to be on campus, as well as student journalists. You had legal observers, so objective people who are there for the purposes of documenting what happens in case there is legal action that is taken after the fact. And then finally, the medical community, which these are standard things when you have protests that likely are going to result in violence. Like the medical community, in case there is violence, to attend to whomever needs it. And so when the police came on campus, and I've seen estimates that are upwards of 1,000 police, they immediately kicked off those three groups of people. And at no point was I nervous, but when the police came and they kicked off that group of people, that's when I started to get nervous, because I knew that those three groups of people were there for our protection and were there for the documentation of what was likely about to occur, which would be violence. So as I mentioned, there were upwards of 1,000 armed, military-trained police officers of three different kinds of police to confront. There were about 24 of us in front of the building and 46 inside. So just the disparity of that is outrageous. It's overwhelming. It's almost cinematic. And so basically what happened is the police kicked off that group of people and then just descended on us, just started tearing us apart, started physically throwing us to the ground. At one point I was struck in the head by likely a baton or shield or the butt of a gun, resulting in a welt on my head the size of a golf ball. I was injured in the ribs, and then I thought that I had broken my hand. And so okay, so this is a scene, this is from Time magazine actually. This is a scene of us being attacked. You can see me there on the left, kind of dodging a punch from an NYPD officer. And then the results of that the following day, next couple of days. I thought my hand was broken. You can see we were instructed to write down a legal firm on our arm for when we were arrested, to be able to have that be our one phone call. We were denied a phone call. We were never read our rights. We were never given a conversation or told, stand down or you'll be arrested. That was obviously implied in why we were there. But in terms of procedure, none of the things that are typically done when you are confronted with arrest were done. And we were massively brutalized. And it's worth mentioning that, I had it easy. As it turns out, my hand was not broken, thankfully and unthankfully, because, it's harder to say, oh, the police hurt me rather than broke my hand. But folks I was arrested with had skull fractures, broken ankles, broken wrists, a dislocated pelvis. 4 people were taken into the hospital while they were in police custody. Students were evicted from their homes. And so I decided to write about it and to be very vocal about it. Again, because I felt so privileged to be in the position that I was, given everything that I just mentioned, I felt like it was my duty to speak publicly about this. And it was also one of the reasons why I chose arrest, because I knew that if I were arrested, it would give me the authority to speak to the media and help write the narrative. Up until this point, I had been seeing so many things in the news about that were just not representative of my experience as a Columbia student, talking about violent anti-Semitism when I had been to the encampment and it was just like a music festival. It was just, people from all faiths and none, from all walks of life, just breaking bread together and and sharing their stories in communities. And so seeing something so grossly different represented on the media was horrifying to me. So as a result, I made a lot of media appearances. I wrote an article in USA Today, which I think will be dropped in the chat, which was kind of more of a walkthrough of my experience. Appeared in NBC, NPR, New York Times, Time Magazine, a documentary, so on and so forth, because I felt like it was so important for me to share my experience when there are all these counter narratives coming up, talking about outside agitators, talking about how we've been radicalized, talking about how we were agents of Hamas or supporting terrorism. And so as a result, that put an obvious target on my back. And it resulted in more or less this, which was not a surprise, but basically I was smeared all over online, all over Twitter, all over in the comment sections. I received death threats in my LinkedIn. People found my email by searching Columbia and wrote nasty things. And fortunately and unfortunately, I've done a lot of research on extremism online and terrorism. So I spent a lot of time in the dark corners of the internet and have read a lot of gross things. So this was not surprising, because this is what the the internet is. And two, it's not like these are things that really particularly hurt me, but more just because the reason I mentioned kind of my academic background ahead of this is just because a lot of the rhetoric around this is, you are a snowflake. You don't know what you're talking about. You are just privileged and, you're woke and all these different things, libtard, whatever. And just really trying to discredit the things that myself and other people who are Columbia students, and so, know how to think for ourselves, to try to invalidate the things that we've experienced, the things that make us qualified to speak on this issue in a nuanced way. So I bring this part up just because I really love the theme is the new McCarthyism. In my master's, I did my master's thesis actually looking at the information operations between the US and Russia during the Cold War. And so I'm a student of Cold War history. And I would say arguably the most insidious thing that came out of McCarthyism, which ran from 1947 and 1959, was that although it was a government initiative that was strictly focused on government employees to root out communism, it permeated American society in a way that made people suspicious of their neighbors, of their friends, of their teachers, of officials. It created a culture of paranoia, initially aimed at an external adversary, but eventually one that turned insular and fostered a paranoid society that discouraged community and encouraged isolation on the basis of quote unquote safety. And so that's what we're seeing here is this sense of paranoia, this sense of looking over your shoulder and finger pointing, trying to expose people for some kind of villain that you might think they are, and really to turn people against each other. And that's what I and other students on Columbia have witnessed. A dear friend of mine said, it's not the protesters on campus that are making me feel unsafe. It's actually the university administration. It's all of the police that are being put on campus and turning this campus into a police state that makes me feel unsafe. And that's McCarthyism. It's wanting to try to root these things out, having this invisible enemy, and making people turn against each other. And that's what we've seen on campus. And one of the beautiful things that came out, particularly of the USA Today article that I wrote, is that it was so widely shared that I was approached by several Jewish students who knew me personally afterward and said, "Thank you for writing that, because this has actually shaped my understanding of the protests." And so, so advice being, lean in. Like, it's hard to hate people up close. And that's what the internet does, is it distances people, and it's hard to hate people up close. And so when you have a face, when you have a name, when you have a teacher or a TA or a student or a colleague who subscribes to something that's different from you, have those conversations, because that's where hate gets destroyed. That's where disunity becomes unity. So anyway, jumping back into our narrative, after I wrote this article, or after I was arrested, there were several narratives that came out. The morning after, Eric Adams, who's the mayor of New York City, said the NYPD's precision policing ensured that the operation was organized, calm, and that there were no injuries or violent clashes. Manu Shafiq, who was our president up until several days ago, wrote an email to the university-wide email that I got several hours after returning home from being arrested and held in jail. And she said, "I thank the NYPD for their incredible professionalism and support." There were politicians in the days leading up to this and the days after who condemned what was happening on campus. Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, came and had the audacity to stand on the top of our library steps and speak to something he knew nothing about, condemning the protest movement, condemning those who had erected the encampment, and saying that we were vilifying Jewish students on campus. Crucially, Jewish students have been so crucial to this moment, to this movement. During the encampment, there was a Shabbat, Passover happened, and people, shared a meal together. So anti-Semitism is not something that I personally have observed during the past few months. And then finally, media reporting. As I mentioned, just seeing the narrative that had come out before, during, and after all of these things happened was just so infuriating because it just didn't represent my experience. So you have this system of people who you're paying through your tax dollars, paying through your tuition dollars to keep you safe, being the ones that are actually systemically gaslighting you. And that has been probably the central term that I have used to describe my experience with this, is that it's wild to have experienced something so physically, emotionally, and intellectually traumatic, and then to have everyone from the President of the United States to the President of your university to media outlets saying something that is completely contradictory to your own personal experience. And that, for me, has been the most traumatic aspect of it, is the fact that, this story that I was beaten and arrested to be able to tell is one that is not being believed because of systemic gaslighting. So going back to the theme of New McCarthyism, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot over the past few months is the cost of protest. As Josh mentioned, we're kind of building on the foundations of a long history of student protest movements at Columbia, starting from 1968, the student movement that protested the Vietnam War, up through apartheid South Africa, and even now today, 2024, protesting the way that university uses our tuition dollars. And it's not to discredit any of the protests that have happened before, but I would argue that the cost of protest in 2024 is wildly more costly than it was in any other point in human history because of the internet, because you have things like doxing. Several days after being arrested, the NYPD released the names, addresses, ages, and genders, misgendering many people, of I want to say maybe 50 or 60 folks who were arrested. And this information then got proliferated all over the right-wing media and really gross websites online, which then catalyzed things like physical danger, stalking, harassing, vandalism, surveilling. There was one person I was arrested with who had their home with multiple children in it graffitied with pro-Nazi signs. Misquoting and skewing involvement. So my experience with the media, I got kind of a crash course in the media and how the media kind of slices up your experience, slices up your story, and uses it to their agenda and not letting a story be a story itself. Future employment. So the fact that the internet is forever, and for people who have been public, it does have a long-lasting impression on employers when they Google you. Legal consequences. There are folks who are inside the occupied building who are facing federal terrorism charges. Expulsion and suspension. Although things have quieted down over the summer, there've still been a lot of protesting as internal trials for student expulsion and suspension are happening. And so yeah, all of these things mirror kind of the paranoia of the McCarthy era of, again, trying to turn people against each other, turn friends and neighbors into enemies. And that's what we're seeing now. So what comes next? I don't know. I know, but I don't know. This is something that we're building on a legacy of people who have been pushing for Israeli divestment for decades. This is probably the most significant stride that we've made so far. You know, we being myself and people who have come before me, probably the most significant stride that we've made so far. And we are not stopping until we achieve divestments. As I mentioned, Manu Shafiq, our former president, announced her resignation just several days ago. And so have been getting a lot of inquiries about people saying, oh, you know, that's huge. So what comes next? It is huge, but it actually doesn't affect our messaging whatsoever. We're asking for divestment, transparency, and amnesty. Okay, so she resigned. Tell me what you're going to do about divestment. Tell me how you're going to spend our tuition dollars, because that's what we care about. We don't really care about getting rid of university bureaucrats. I mean, we do, but what we're really asking for is the end to a genocide, the end to complicity in bombing our friends and neighbors. There are many people whose arms I linked up with, who I've been in contact with, whose tuition dollars have literally gone to bomb their own families, who have lost cousins and fathers and brothers and sisters and aunties. Like, their money, their tuition dollars are going to that. And so that is what we're asking. And so we are planning on continuing the protest movement. I'm not entirely sure what that will look like. And Quad is in the process of kind of recalibrating and refiguring out what it looks like to breathe life into this movement again come fall, because I think that in many respects the university has hoped that we would just kind of go away after the summer and after the last police raid, but that is not happening anytime soon. We are determined, we are steadfast, and this isn't a momentary fleeting passion. This is something that many of us feel in our bones, feel in our blood, and are willing to do whatever it takes. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much for sharing that with us, Ali. So sorry that you and your fellow students have gone through this for the crime of demanding divestment from apartheid and genocide. I think that label of systemic gaslighting is such an apt term for what you experienced and for what the world has been witnessing. I just want to thank you for the leadership displayed by yourself and your fellow organizers. And I just want you to know that you have a force of allies here in VFP.